strange force witches, threads of destiny, and a story told from a certain point of view, I cannot wait to share my musings about episode 3 of The Acolyte with you. Hello, my name is Naomi, and this is Loth-Cat Musings, where I share my musings on Star Wars and beyond. Over the years, some of my favorite Star Wars stories have been when we've gotten into some of the weird Force stuff. I loved the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars, the Yoda Chronicles looking at the Cosmic Force and the Living Force, the Bendu, the World Between Worlds, and the Night Sister episodes of the Clone Wars have always been some of my favorites. And of course, witches have been part of the Star Wars universe since 1994 and the book A Courtship of Princess Leia, which was my favorite Legends and EU book at the time. So needless to say, this episode of The Acolyte was right up my alley, and I loved it. One of the very first things I noticed was the title itself, Destiny. The previous episodes had two-sided titles, Lost and Found, Justice and Revenge, showing that we were getting 2 points of view. But a single title tells us we're only getting 1 point of view, and I think it was Osha's. And I think that's very important for us to remember going forward, that this story is told from a certain point of view, and we don't have the whole picture yet. This episode was set 16 years before the previous 2 episodes, and looks at the events of what brought Osha to the Jedi Order and believing that Mae was dead. Right at the beginning, we see a very clear difference between Osha and Mae. Osha likes to be by herself. She likes to sit among nature outside of the stone fortress she lives at with the Coven. She asks a lot of questions. Whereas Mae seems more outgoing, tends to get angry quicker, and is fully invested in her life with the Coven. As we learn in this episode, Mother Anastasia, who is the leader of the Coven that on Brendok that the girls are a part of, created the twins. Now, we don't know exactly what that means and exactly how she did it. It is suggested that whatever she did, the Jedi would not approve of. And so that puts a bit of a shadow over both the twins and the Coven itself. I'm wondering if the twins are some sort of dyad in the Force. It's something that we haven't really explored beyond The Rise of Skywalker, where it was first introduced. It was sort of dropped into the middle of that, and there was no real explanation given, and as far as I know, it hasn't been explored in any other material. So it would be very interesting to dive further into the idea of a dyad and expand on that and the lore behind it. The poem the twins say with each other really seems to point with that. You're with me, and I'm with you. Always one, but born as two. As above sit the stars, and below lies the sea. I give you you, and you give me me. The words of this, especially that always one, but born as two, really push toward the idea of a Force dyad, or a split soul, or something along those lines. A yin and a yang, a light and a dark. That is a very interesting thing going forward, and I'm really interested to see where they go. I will say I don't feel that the twins being created by some sort of use of the Force deteriorates or takes away from Anakin Skywalker at all. That's been saying a lot. It's a completely different thing, I think. And we also don't have the full picture of the twins and what Mother Anastasia did, or what she used, or what the purpose was behind their creation. So let's just sit back, not make any judgments, and see where the story goes before we all claim that this has destroyed Star Wars. Because, spoiler alert, it hasn't. I loved the character of Mother Anastasia. I think she was beautifully and masterfully performed by Jodie Turner-Smith. She was powerful and commanding as the leader of the Coven, but tender and compassionate as the mother of Osha and Mae. She carried herself with grace, but she was unmovable. A beautiful picture of feminine strength. I am, however, cautious to hold on to this picture of her too tightly because we do not have the full picture yet, and it's very much framed from a certain point of view, from Osha viewing her mother, which of course would really be in a very favorable light. Could we learn things about Mother Anastasia and the Coven down the line that would change this view? And would that new information take away from the picture that we saw of this person in this episode? I think part of what this series is doing is challenging the idea of just good guys and bad guys and making us look at our characters as full people. Could Mother Anastasia be this beautiful, compassionate mother, but also somebody who harnesses the dark side to use for her own purposes? Could she have a good reason for taking the path that she's taking? I'm merely speculating at this point because we don't have the full picture. And everything that I've seen from the Coven so far, aside from Mother Anastasia possessing Torben when the Jedi show up, which I think is very, very, very important to what happens later on. But other than that, I haven't seen anything that suggests that they're evil dark side witches. They use the Force differently than the Jedi. They have a different understanding and vocabulary. But most of what was said about the thread really is in line, I feel, with the teaching of the Jedi and the Force. I wonder if this is a case of two groups of people who are weary or afraid of each other based on appearances only. And if they sat down and talked to each other and listened to each other, they might find that they have a lot more in common than they actually know. Of course, the Jedi don't come out looking too favorable in this episode. Spying on the girls in the wood, breaking into the Coven's fortress, and then presuming they have the right to remove the children from their home. Again, I am cautioned to jump to conclusions about their motivations behind their actions because we are clearly seeing this story from one side. There's a lot going on here that we don't know. Why are the Jedi on Brendok to begin with? They obviously don't have a temple there. They're living out of their ship. Indira claims that they thought the world was uninhabited, but that's clearly a lie. Why did they break into the Coven's fortress rather than approaching them? It is suggested from a conversation between Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral that the Jedi had just arrived, but no contact had been made yet. Why is that? What information did the Jedi think they have about the Coven that made them act so heavily on defense? And who gave them that information? And do all the Jedi present know all the information? Or are some of them left out of the whole bigger picture? All these things are really important going forward and making judgments about, were the Jedi good? Were they bad? Were the Coven good? Were the Coven bad? Or maybe they both made mistakes on both sides. In the episode, we are led to believe that Mae started a fire that got out of control, caused an explosion which killed all the witches and destroyed their stone fortress home. But things don't quite add up for that to be the whole picture. I mean, that's a really big fire to start from a little lamp and a notebook. And you can hear the witches scream as Osha is climbing into the wall not long after the fire started. The timing just seems off and really suspicious. Also, they're powerful witches. Couldn't they just stop an out-of-control fire? Why were they all laying where they were sitting? Why didn't anybody try to run, get help, move out of the way? And why was Sol even in the fortress to begin with, able to rescue Osha? The whole thing is just really fishy to me. Mae tells Osha when they're standing on the bridge together that this was all her fault. Now that could be read as Mae saying, it's your fault, I got angry because you wanted to leave, you made me angry, I started this fire, so this is all your fault. But I think it has a bigger meaning. I think that Mae saw the Jedi coming into the fortress, that maybe there was some sort of struggle, maybe even Mae tried to use her new witch powers against them and they backfired. But when she says this is all your fault, I think she's speaking about the presence of the Jedi not the fire, not the conflict in itself. I think Mae knows things that Osha doesn't know, and all of that will come to light later, I hope. I have a theory that Torben was really disturbed by whatever Mother Anastasia did to his mind when she possessed him when the Jedi showed up at the Ascension ceremony. And because of that, he makes some really rash decisions. He does things that he probably shouldn't have done. I think Kalnaka tries to stop him at some point, and the other Jedi have to sort of clean up the mess that he's caused. And the combination of Mae's anger and Torben's fear cause the explosion, whether that's a literal explosion or a figurative one, that then ripples out through the rest of the series. Clearly, whatever happened had a profound impact on Torben. You can see at the end of this episode that there are fresh scars on his face that weren't there before, scars that you see when Mae finds him 16 years later. And then he also spent 10 years in a Barash vow, which was an act of penitence by the Jedi, where they remove themselves from everything except the presence of the Force. He stayed in that for 10 years, and then chose death over confessing to the Order what had actually happened. So that's some pretty major guilt going on there. Also, Kalnaka was clearly affected as well, choosing to live on his own, presumably as a wayseeker. But Wookiees are notoriously social creatures, so for him to choose to remove himself from living in community in a temple with other Jedi, says that there's a lot going on with Kalnaka as well. However, Sol and Indira seem to have been able to continue on within Jedi society, more or less as same as before. So why is that? What do Kalnaka and Torben know that Indira and Sol don't? There's so many questions. I just love a show that makes you ask questions and what makes you want to dig further into the material and further into the characters and rummage around in their brains and figure out what's going on. It's so much fun. I'm really loving this. There are also some really lovely themes explored in the episodes that I just keep thinking about. The major one being the title itself, Destiny. Often people think of destiny as something that is decided for you, that you have no control over. But I think that's fate. Fate is out of your control, that something's going to happen regardless of your choices. You're going to get to that point anyway. But destiny, as I understand it, is something that guides or pulls somebody toward a higher purpose or higher plan. But it's reliant on the choices and the action that person makes. Those choices and actions determine the path and can change destiny depending on how they act. In this episode, Mother Anastasia tells Osha, your destiny is not decided by an anonymous force. You get to choose. If you want to pull on the thread, pull it. Earlier in the episode, she says, the thread is not a power to wield. Pull the thread and change everything. It ties you to your destiny. It binds you to others. It is clear from the start of this episode that Osha feels her destiny lies outside of the Coven. Both Mae and Mother Anastasia try to convince Osha to stay on the path that they see for her. But when it comes down to it, Mother Anastasia sees that Osha has a different path. And while it breaks her heart, and it goes against everything she's been working towards since the twins were created, she doesn't force Osha down the path that the Coven have for her. She is willing, it seems, to let Osha forge her own path. As a mother, I found the scene heartbreakingly beautiful. It is the dichotomy of parenthood. We teach them, we raise them, we try to instill values that we feel are important for them to become the adults that we hope them to be. But ultimately, there comes a time where we have to step back. We have to let go. Let them choose which thread to pull and which destiny they will follow on their own. Mother Anastasia could have said no, locked Osha away and said, no, this is the path that's been laid out for you and this is the path you're going to take. However, she chooses to love her daughter and allow her to be herself, not who her mother and her sister expect her to be, or wanted her to be. It's the greatest gift a parent could give a child, the freedom to be themselves, to choose their destiny, even if that choice is painful, and then to love them in that choice, regardless of our own pain. My daughter is only little, but even now I'm trying to let her be fully herself, even if it's not the picture I had of who my daughter would be. My picture and who she are two different things, and I would rather her be her than be what I want her to be. And I hope as she gets bigger and as she makes bigger choices, as she decides which threads to pull, what destiny to follow, that I can continue to just let her be her and love her through that and give her what she needs to make those choices. I hope that I can have the same grace and compassion that Mother Anastasia had with Osha. But we also look at what happens when we try to impose our views and our beliefs on others. I believe Osha was meant for something outside the Coven. Even before she met the Jedi, she had a longing to be her own person, to do something different and move away from everything that she knew around her. There was a strong inside pull there. And could her path had led her to the Jedi even without the tragedy that ultimately brought her there? The Jedi imposing their belief that only they could control the Force and train children, that their way is better than the Coven's, all of those things ultimately just led to fear and anger and ultimately death. This is what happens when we fear that which is different to us. What could have happened if the Jedi had come in with a sense of curiosity, a willingness to learn from the Coven rather than expecting them to be bad? Of course, we don't have the whole picture. And why was the Coven exiled in the first place? What made the Jedi feel that they had to investigate? All of those things are questions that are still up in the air. But regardless, I think it's still a strong message. One that is largely being missed by huge portions of the Star Wars fandom right now. The amount of anger and hate and destruction being thrown around online because of this show is really quite sad. The need to be right and for others to be wrong are driving people to say such hurtful things to each other. And I've seen it on all sides, not just one or the other. And of course that flows over into life outside fandom as well. It seems today the extremes are getting more extreme and the gap between the two is getting larger and there's very little middle ground in the middle. But if we could just listen to each other without making judgments and try to see the whole picture, not just our perspectives, if we could allow each person to choose their own destiny, to make choices about their own lives, and then embrace those choices with an open heart and curiosity, maybe then we could find balance and peace. But sadly, there's always those who are going to encourage discourse and fractions, and encourage people down a darker path. And we don't know in the story of the Acolyte who else may be stirring up problems between the Coven and the Jedi. The Sith operate from the shadows. Maybe this story is a warning to us to really look into the shadows, not only outside of ourselves, but inside as well, and shine light into them before the shadows cause too much destruction and set us down a path where we cannot come back from, like where the Jedi are heading now. I hope you enjoyed listening to my musings. I would love to hear your thoughts on Destiny, on the witches, on Mae and Osha, and all the questions that this episode has raised. If you like this episode, please feel free to share it on your own social media, like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and I look forward to sharing more of my musings with you in the future.